Hey guys. Tonight we stand amid the icy darkness of Westminster Abbey, where the ancient stone walls seem to whisper of death and decay. You can imagine the suffocating stench of centuries of decomposition rushing into your nostrils, and believe me, you wouldn't survive if you inhaled that smell, even though they brought thousands of natural essential oil diffusers to scent the entire space. The rotten odor never faded. It's as if the Queen's spirit still lingers, drifting through every corner of the Abbey. So horrifying that no one could ever imagine it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your local time zone. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the moment you gently lift the lid of a legendary queen's coffin, not to the soft sigh of peace, but to a suffocating stench that pours out like billowing black smoke. The thick layer of lead exudes the pungent odor of decay, so intense that each breath feels like inhaling whirls of deadly darkness. Etched across the coffin's surface are strange inscriptions, Tudor roses, archaic symbols, and blurred dates raising countless unanswered questions. Are these merely commemorative engravings, or the marks of unknown hands that once breached this tomb? And the body within, once celebrated as the very embodiment of beauty and power, now lies twisted and gaunt, stripped of the majestic grace that history once preserved. In 1869, on a cold February morning beneath the marble floor of Westminster Abbey, the rasping sound of chisels shattered the stillness. Flickering candlelight cast ghostly shadows across the Gothic arches, as if the spirits of centuries past drifted through the darkness. Dean Arthur Stanley, the scholarly cleric turned archaeologist, stood surrounded by centuries-old dust and the stench of rot, peering down into the yawning void, newly revealed. In his hand were weathered architectural drawings, glaringly at odds with burial records muddled by time. Rumour had it that within this labyrinth of vaults lay the long-lost tomb of King James I. Missing for over 200 years. A mystery enough to thrill any archaeologist. Yet the secrets awaiting discovery proved far darker. Beneath that thick layer of dust and the ashen air of the past lay not only a royal tomb to be uncovered, but a litany of tales about how society treated its exalted dead. From the morbid practice of stacking coffins, to clandestine intrusions that plundered relics, to legends of a pressure coffin brimming with toxic decomposition gases, these chilling fragments form a gruesome mosaic that raises the hairs on your neck and forces you to question: are the glories we celebrate under gilded crowns truly deserving? Or behind those ornate diadems and sculpted reliefs lurks a ruthless power structure, ready to treat royal corpses as mere commodities for research, profit, and propaganda? These secrets are more than a simple archaeological tale. They are an invitation to step into the shadowed corridors of power and ambition, where the souls of the dead have yet to find rest, and their echoes linger among carved stone and flickering flames. Our journey into these dark depths is only just beginning. Let us turn back the clock to a bitter March morning in 1603 at Richmond Palace, where the late winter wind whistled through heavy wooden doors, carrying damp chill and the lingering scent of wood smoke. 5 months earlier, Elizabeth I had as the very image of a powerful monarch. She had driven back the Spanish Armada, hosted lavish moonlit entertainment, and enchanted foreign ambassadors with her beauty, intellect, and regal bearing. But now she lay gaunt and motionless on the cold wooden floor, unable to lift her head even once, for 4 long days before being carried back to her bed. Before this, Elizabeth had stood perfectly still for more than 15 hours from dusk until dawn, driven by a superstitious fear that if she lay down, she would never awaken again. Imagine it, the Virgin Queen, lauded as steadfast, indomitable, and the very pillar of her realm, now propped upright on cold stone, her legs trembling beneath the weight of her heavy silk gown, utterly powerless before the immutable cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. The terrified ladies-in-waiting hastily spread cushions beneath her weary feet, bracing themselves for the final collapse, when she might slump like a withering blossom. Within the palace walls, rumours of the Queen's condition spread like wildfire. Servants whispered that she could smell the foul odour of her own body decaying, and that her once bright eyes had grown dark-rimmed and vacant. Like a stagnant pool, they claimed Elizabeth heard ghostly whispers in the shadowed corridors, and that, on occasion, she would sit huddled, trembling, tracing strange symbols onto the velvet drapes. Then one morning, near the very chair, padded to support her trembling arms, they discovered a playing card impaled by a rusty nail. The image of that skewered card, the 7 of Spades, its surface smeared with faded Latin script, was no mere prank. It was a grim reminder of her deepest terror. The woman once convinced she was God's chosen ruler, now trapped in a nightmare either contrived by the court or unleashed by her own fraying mind. The nailed card stood as a symbol of her downfall, a curse laid upon the zenith of her glory, heralding the apocalypse of her authority. Elizabeth Southwell, one of the Queen's most trusted attendants, later recounted how Elizabeth endured panic and hallucinations. She saw herself transformed into a nameless wretch, ulcerated and naked in the palace's dim light. She heard the rattling of bones, phantom voices calling her name on the breeze. The ordeal terrified not only her closest confidantes, but even higher-ranking courtiers who dared not approach too near. The physical decay of Elizabeth was equally shocking. Nearly all her teeth had fallen out, leaving only a few blackened stumps, turning her once a radiant smile into a hollow void. Her hair fell away in tufts, exposing a scalp mottled with white flakes. She rejected all cosmetics, cast aside her gowns and jewellery. The face that once prompted ambassadors across Europe to bow in admiration now appeared haggard, dark circles under sunken cheeks, skin as pale as wax. The joyous concerts and splendid balls that once filled the palace had given way to a haunting silence. The only sounds were the slow ticking of a clock, her rattled breathing, and the soft footsteps of her ladies-in-waiting. Dressed in traditional black, they glanced at her with a mixture of pity and fear. Every time Elizabeth attempted to sit upright, a sharp pain racked her body, forcing her to grind her remaining teeth as if trying to snap her frail jaw. Outside the window, late season, cherry blossoms shivered in the cold breeze, their yellowed petals drifting like fragments of broken time, reminding all that even the most precious things must fade. Dew collected on the wooden floorboards in slender trails, deepening the gloom. Richmond Palace, once the very symbol of English power, had become a gilded infirmary. Contemporary medicine understood little of her ailment, which may have been a severe pneumonia, compounded by an irrational fear and mental anguish born of rulership's pressures. Court physicians brought her every herbal concoction, medicated wine, and fumigation of aromatic smoke. Yet nothing could halt her physical and spiritual decline. Platters of sweet pastries and cups of herbal tea were offered at every hour, but Elizabeth merely sipped and sniffed, her vacant eyes unable to taste. Kent, a lady-in-waiting once her confidante, furtively wiped away tears behind the velvet drapes whenever the Queen choked back sobs. They feared not only the loss of their sovereign, but the chaos and power struggles that would erupt behind those closed doors. In that hushed atmosphere, the oppressive weight of fossilized power and the stench of human frailty mingled. The court had never witnessed a scene more harrowing. The once sovereign who stood atop the pinnacle of glory, now shackled by superstition and hovering death's sword. The moment the impaled card was discovered, became the Tudor dynasty's death knell. Its echo reverberated through the palace's corridors, warning anyone who dared gaze upon the future that when authority no longer accompanies health, even the greatest glory is illusion. From this point on, Elizabeth I's mortal journey drew to a close, ushering in a tragic chapter of archaeological revelation and grisly secrets, awaiting the day when the final lid of the lead coffin would at last be lifted. When Queen Elizabeth I's final breath slipped away on the morning of the 24th of March, a pall of gloom descended over Richmond Palace. Its royal bookshelves fell silent, and her portrait seemed veiled by impenetrable shadows. Yet, instead of permitting a post-mortem to clarify the cause of death, the Lord Steward of the household, the monarch's most trusted officer of ceremony and state secrets, forbade any autopsy. The ban sent shockwaves through the court. Was it merely to preserve the immaculate legend of the Virgin Queen, or did darker truths lie hidden beneath the shroud? Rumours swept the marble corridors like a howling wind. Some whispered she bore signs of a fatal illness. Others insisted they saw evidence of poisoning. Whatever the reality, the decree sowed doubt and unease, prompting many to wonder if the crown was hiding something more terrible than mere mortality. On the 28th of April of that same year, the funeral of Elizabeth I, ever the Virgin Queen, began at Whitehall, accompanied by solemn prayers. The scene was almost entirely black and reverent. Rows of nobles garbed in sable cloaks, their faces hidden behind mourning veils, Tudor badges pinned upon their shoulders, every eye fixed on the ornate hearse's wheels as they rolled over the cobblestones, bearing the double coffin, an inner shell of polished oak wrapped in a thick layer of lead thought, then to preserve the royal scent by sealing away any taint of decay, draped in sumptuous royal purple silk, embroidered with wooden reliefs of the Queen clutching her sceptre and wearing her crown. Every detail had been meticulously arranged to proclaim eternal sovereignty, yet the very extravagance only heightened the macabre impression of the leaden burden, a stark reminder that even in death the Queen remained bound by ceremony and power. Atop the coffin rested a startlingly lifelike wooden effigy. Gaudy paint brought her features to life, eyelids half closed, lips curved in that familiar, uncanny smile as if she watched her own funeral unfold. Her crimson cloak was lifted, revealing painted hands gripping the golden sceptre and orb that gleamed under torchlight. Convincing onlookers, she still reigned, never having abandoned her throne. As the procession moved forward, black-draped horses plodded solemnly, manes tossing in the breeze. While crowds lining the streets held their breath, a sorrowful symphony arose, the steady clop-a-clop of hooves on pavement, the dirge-like wail of funeral trumpets, and the peal of Westminster Abbey's bells, tolling like lamentations. From balconies, windows, and rooftops, tear-streaked faces pressed close, watching. Some wept openly, others sighed deeply, and a chorus of mournful cries echoed like calls to the departed, unprecedented in London's memory. Even the stoutest men found knees buckling, faces frozen at the sight of a once mighty woman, the arbiter of a nation's fate, now lying unresponsive within her coffin, her carved wooden nameplate reading, "A glorious reign, yet fleeting." Oh, earlier, the court had arranged every funeral rite, Whitehall draped in black banners, Dominican friars chanting prayers continuously, altars lining the corridors adorned with white chrysanthemums and pale roses to symbolize purity and sorrow. Strangely, though the ceremony was solemn and grand, the air felt heavy, as if foretelling a dire outcome. At intervals, draughts flickered the candles and made the effigy's shadows sway, sending shivers through the mourners. Upon reaching Westminster Abbey, the coffin was slowly hoisted onto the stone steps of Henry VII's chapel, bathed in the flickering glow of oil lamps. The choir joined in Requiem Aeternam, weaving with the hush and sighs of the crowd. Placed beneath the vaulted Tudor ceiling, the coffin lay cradled by history itself. Beneath that leaden weight and purple silk, everyone sensed the divide between the outward splendor and the dark mystery within. After the Requiem, the coffin was interred in the royal vault alongside Henry VIII's great tombs. Within a single communal sepulchre, massive stone slabs sealed the chamber, pressing down upon the lead beneath, hiding all secrets inside. Carved upon her ledger stone read, "Elizabeth I." The Virgin Queen, whose reign was glorious, now rests in peace. But who truly believed such peace existed? The subtle cracks in the ceremony and the autopsy ban had planted unspoken doubts in every heart. Legend holds that, on the very night her coffin closed, a cold mist seeped from fissures in the stone. Drifting through the abbey, whispers rose among the shadows. Speaking of unrevealed secrets, had the Tudor line concealed a terminal illness? Did courtiers fear the disclosure of poisoning? Or was it simply a ruse to protect the untouchable image of England's last Virgin Queen? No one knew, only that the web of history and power lay tightly woven. For the next 2.5 centuries, the lead-lined coffin and wooden effigy lay undisturbed, weathering time in silence. Visitors passed by the gleaming tombs and polished reliefs, yet none dared probe the lead covering. It seemed the court believed lead would forever lock away any curse, like a black curtain shielding truth from reality. Yet grudges and suspicions would not release their hold. Tales of the autopsy ban spread far and wide. A reminder that not even death could erase the entanglements of power. People told of strange encounters at the vault door, footsteps in the dark, shadows slipping between the stones. Many came to believe Elizabeth's spirit refused to relinquish her throne, still wandering among the fading flames of abbey candles. And as the doubts surrounding Elizabeth's tomb had not yet faded, the Queen's remains entered a new chapter of royal tragedy. Immediately after the solemn interment beneath Henry VIII's stone floor, her body was lowered into the deep vault of the grand mausoleum at Westminster Abbey. The lead coffin, hundreds of pounds in weight, thick and frigid, was believed to serve as an eternal shield against decay and odour. Yet it also concealed countless dark secrets. That colossal lead barrier, sealing the immortal image of the Queen, quietly imprisoned her withered bones and a host of unanswered questions. 3 years later, in 1606, King James I, her successor and nephew by marriage, ordered the relocation of her remains from their original resting place. He decreed that the Queen's body be moved to the north aisle of Henry VII's chapel, where the coffin of Mary I, Elizabeth's half-sister, awaited. This act was far more than a mere rearrangement of tombs. It was an unmistakable political statement. The two sisters had been fierce adversaries, one a Catholic, the other a Protestant. Mary had burned heretics by the thousands, while Elizabeth had executed the Queen who dared challenge her throne. The moment the two lead coffins came to rest, one atop the other, Elizabeth above Mary, it created a poignant emblem of conflict. Sisters, united by blood, yet diametrically opposed in policy and faith. Beneath the white marble legistone carved with Tudor motifs lay only the name and reign of Elizabeth. Elizabetha Regina Vr. Elizabeth, Queen by the grace of God, surrounded by reliefs celebrating her victories and sharp intellect. Mary, who had reigned for a brief, turbulent 5 years, was relegated to a mere footnote in her sister's glory, her name omitted entirely from the inscription. Her coffin buried under the weight of Elizabeth's legacy. Within the sacred space, where Tudor-patterned stone glowed gold in the dim light, the double coffin stood as a silent declaration of power. Even in death, royal lineage could not rest in equality. Every slab and sculpted panel had been crafted to reinforce Elizabeth's supreme status, yet in doing so, they inadvertently suffocated memory of Mary, her own sister. Contemporary accounts record an eerie quiet around Henry VII's chapel on the day of the transfer. Only the creak of the hearse and the scrape of coffins on the stone floor broke the silence. Mary's coffin sat lower, bearing the invisible pressure of Elizabeth's weight above. Black drapes lined the causeway for the subterranean sisterly union ceremony. Yet few dared approach, fearing that no amount of perfumes or fumigations could mask the lingering stench trapped within. King James I even commissioned a white marble statue to be placed above the tomb, depicting Elizabeth in majestic repose, sceptre in hand, crown upon her head, her posture as composed as if she still reigned despite her passing. The inscription, Fata Reginae Aeternus, the fate of the Queen is eternal, underscored the message. Elizabeth was immortal. Mary was eclipsed. The statue reminded all that even in death, the royal image was meticulously preserved, and mercilessly so. Grave diggers later reported that during the move, the thick lead made a groaning noise under its own weight, and dozens of tiny cracks appeared on the lid. 3 years' worth of compression, plus the jostling movement exposed never-before-you-seen details. Microscopic fissures etched into the lead, fragments of rotted wood drifting out, and threads of the mysterious embalming cloth. Though the cracks were small, for those obsessed with the tomb, they were gaps wide enough to sow doubt about the true condition of the remains. Contemporary historians noted that public opinion was thrown into turmoil. Some believed James I sought to bury all evidence that Elizabeth had not died peacefully but perhaps of a dire illness or foul play. Others cynically quipped, only an enemy would place one sister's corpse atop another to prove victory. The court understood implicitly that, in the struggle for power, even the tomb becomes a political weapon. Beneath the slab of stone, where the two coffins lay intertwined, royal energy simmered still. Mold roots clung to the lead. Condensation droplets formed on its surface, like invisible tears, mourning an unequal fate. The bell of history tolled, but its echoes seemed reserved for Elizabeth alone. Mary, once princess and queen, remained a dim reflection beneath that leaden weight. For centuries, pilgrims quietly entered Henry VII's chapel to gaze upon Elizabeth's luminous statue, yet few remembered that another woman lay below, silent and forgotten. That heavy lead shield remained intact, as though a secret curtain between two worlds, the brilliant realm above, and the reeking underworld within. And when the final candle guttered out, whispers about the double coffin drifted through the darkness. This was not merely a story of death, but of how the living choose to define the value of each human life. The next chapter would pry open that lead barrier, allowing Dean Stanley's torch to reveal the gruesome truth beneath gilded veneer and awaken a nightmare never before told. And the untold nightmare did not end with the whispers around the double tomb. It stretched all the way to the 1862nd, when the location of James I's grave remained a great mystery amid tangled burial records. With Queen Victoria's approval, Dean Arthur Stanley, a scholarly man with a passion for archaeology, launched a campaign to survey every crypt beneath Westminster Abbey. Armed with rudimentary diagrams and complex notes on the Abbey's mortuary layout, he meticulously cross-referenced royal archives with on-site architecture, determined to lift a veil of secrecy that had shrouded the site for more than 2 centuries. The survey work lasted many months. At first, Stanley's team dared only to probe side crypts, checking wall thickness and taking caliper measurements, before finally moving into the Henry VII chapel, the presumed burial place of James I. Every step required strict adherence to church protocol and royal law, for Westminster Abbey was not merely a religious monument, but a vault of regal secrets. Midnight meetings between Dean Stanley and the monks tasked with the burials were tense affairs, where faith and science intersected in uneasy dialogue. Then came the 11th of February, 1869, exactly 366 years after Elizabeth I's death, when the excavation team began drilling through the thick floor slab beneath Henry VII's tomb. Each chisel strike rang out in steady rhythm, stone chips scattering, until at last the final barrier gave way, revealing a cramped, dungeon-like chamber. Flickering candlelight caught motes of dust and damp walls, and the overpowering stench of decay immediately flooded the workmen's lungs, leaving them momentarily speechless. Before them stood 2 lead coffins stacked like grotesque bunk beds in a Gothic novel. The upper coffin, thought to be Elizabeth's, had turned a mossy green with age, giving it both a sinister and mournful appearance. Deep folds of lead, crusted with verdigris, peeped through remnants of blackened burial cloth, eliciting involuntary shudders from every observer. But the horror did not end there. Under closer inspection by lantern light, the team discovered a row of Tudor rose inscriptions and the date Anno Domini 1603, etched along the coffin's edge, confirming it as Elizabeth I's final resting place. Yet interspersed among the dignified engravings were crude, savage markings, graffiti left by John Ware in 1645. These scrawled letters, rough and irreverent, revealed a shocking secret. The vault had been illegally entered. Unknown intruders had ventured below to loot royal relics or perhaps to pry open the coffin itself. This revelation tore away the facade of impenetrable security. Observers were aghast that a royal tomb holding the remains of 3 generations of monarchs could be defaced so brazenly. How had the crown, master of ceremony and ritual, remained silent about such an affront? News of the intrusion spread swiftly through London, sending shockwaves through Victorian society. Who would claim that protocol alone could thwart human greed and curiosity? The contemporary press, still in its infancy yet already influential, buzzed with speculation. The Times ran an investigation titled, "Who was John Ware? And what did he do beneath the Abbey?" Illustrated London News published engravings of the Gothic coffins, complete with close-ups of the cracks and graffiti. The normally reticent court was forced to respond, pledging heightened security. A full review of burial records, and special requiem services for the disturbed remains. Yet the spectre of that intrusion continued to haunt the public imagination. Dean Stanley did not stop at mere documentation. He invited archaeologists, forensic surgeons, and chemists to analyze dust samples, cloth fragments, and lead shards. Under the microscope, the darkened fabric was revealed as the residue of herbal embalming compounds. Chemical assays proved that the tomb's internal atmosphere had remained nearly unchanged for 266 years, trapping toxic decomposition gases that only escaped when the lid was disturbed. This explained why a foul odor would sweep through the abbey whenever the vault was opened. The John Ware 1645 graffiti became a subject of intense study. Was he a gravedigger? A shady courtier? Or simply a fame-hungry curiosity seeker? No one knew for sure. But the very existence of his signature convinced many that the lead shell was no impregnable barrier. If John Ware could gain entry, so could others. Perhaps they had stolen or destroyed priceless relics. This archaeological drama opened yet another nightmarish chapter: the struggle between sacred tradition and the pursuit of truth. Westminster Abbey shrine of St. Edward and Henry VII had become a battlefield of civilization. Beneath the gleaming monument, stones lay wounds of the past, still raw. The events of 1869 were not merely the rediscovery of James I's tomb, but the first light exposing the sins and flaws of the royal embalming system. In the years that followed, Dean Stanley published detailed reports cataloguing every fissure, scratch, fragment, and chemical analysis. His papers were archived at the British Museum, becoming invaluable references for future generations of archaeologists. These findings did more than reshape scholarship on Tudor history. They spurred new protocols for safeguarding ancient tombs and applying modern science to heritage preservation. And though nearly 2 centuries have passed, the story of the 11th of February, 1869 still resonates in archaeological circles. A warning that no wall is impregnable against human avarice and curiosity. A lead coffin may lock away odors, but it cannot conceal secrets once they are illuminated by the torch of science. The Tudor royal nightmare from Richmond to the Abbey, from Elizabeth to Stanley, has endured and will persist until humanity finally dares to confront the brutal truths that lie behind the pinnacle of power. And so, when the final torchlight danced upon the stone facade, on the 11th of February, 1869, exactly 366 years to the day after Elizabeth I's death, the mysterious excavation officially began. Dean Arthur Stanley and his archaeological team, after many months of preparation, drilled through the thick floor slab beneath Henry VII's tomb. Each chisel strike echoed in the silent crypt until, at last, the final barrier gave way to reveal a narrow doorway leading down into the vault. A fetid stench of rot, condensed over centuries, wafted upward in a suffocating wave, as if the very breath of decay were desperate to escape. Descending the cramped stone steps, workmen and scholars alike caught only the dim glow of flickering candles. The vault was as tight as a lid on a vast secret. Before them lay 2 lead coffins, stacked like a ghastly pair of bunk beds. The upper coffin, larger and more ornate, wore a crust of greenish verdigris, giving it the appearance of an alien fossil entombed in metal. In that moment, Dean Stanley drew a slow breath and pulled out his notebook. Bending low, he scrutinized every detail. The Tudor rose motifs carved along the lid, the finely sculpted ridges, and the faintly legible inscriptions. He recorded meticulously. Central Tudor rose, diameter 5 centimeter. Inscription, Anno Domini, 1603, engraved 2 millimeter deep, 4 centimeter scratch along the lid's rim. Each mark served as a testament, confirming the journey of her remains from Whitehall to this ancient resting place. But amid these solemn engravings, the glow of the inspection lamp revealed a crude defacement. The scrawled graffiti, John Ware 1645, etched into the lead. They fell silent. This discovery proved the vault had once been breached. Someone, over 2 centuries earlier, had slipped into this dark chamber and carved his name into the Queen's coffin, as though flaunting a trophy from the royal dead. The finding shattered any notion of the tomb's inviolability. The fetid odour grew more pungent as the stale, humid air swirled in the cramped space. Heavy decomposition gases, methane, hydrogensulfide, ammonia mingled into a toxic brew. The labourers retreated, covering their faces with rough cloths to withstand each hammer blow into the subterranean structure. A few reeled back, gasping for fresh air. While Dean Stanley's gaze remained fixed on the coffins, Stanley then split his team into 2 groups, one to expand the lighting rig and erect wooden supports around the vault, the other to approach the upper coffin. When they gently pried open the inner wooden lid, a creak of ancient metal resonated. Beneath the dust, fragments of burial cloth varnished dark by centuries of herbal embalming solutions crumbled away. The scent of medicinal herbs, once intended to preserve the body, now mingled grotesquely with the stench of decay. They photographed the scene for the first time in history, ensuring these revelations would endure beyond that night. Throughout the examination, Dean Stanley never lost sight of the unusual graffiti. He called for a stronger lamp to illuminate John Ware 1645. Under the white beam, the letters stood out, a jagged 1 millimeter deep gouge, uneven as if carved in haste and shadows. John Ware was here, he murmured. And perhaps he was not the only one. Aye, the candlelight flickered, casting dancing phantoms across the vault walls. The team's breaths mingled with the soft drip of water from the low ceiling. The air seemed to freeze at the shock of it all. Even a mighty dynasty could not shield its queen's remains from desecration. In that instant, Dean Stanley realized he was living a Victorian Indiana Jones tale, not hunting treasure, but unearthing the decomposing cadavers of royalty and exposing the darkest secrets hidden beneath thick lead. The excavation continued for hours. Stanley instructed one group to expand the upper tier's survey area and the other to move to the lower Mary level, to determine whether the lower coffin had suffered similar tampering. They found fewer graffiti here, but confirmed the vault's security had been compromised. Scratch marks along the coffin's lip attested to earlier handling of Mary's coffin. Step by step, Stanley catalogued every crack. Location, size, orientation, while collecting tiny lead flakes from the lid for analysis. Fragments of wood and burial cloth were carefully placed in moisture-proof containers. Preliminary findings indicated that the vault's environment had remained stable for 266 years, trapping decomposition gases until any vibration released them in a miasma of putrefaction. Even amid this grim scene, Dean Stanley noted the observers' shifting emotions, from stunned disbelief to dread. then lingering, haunting whenever the lid closed again. The seasoned workmen, hardened by years of excavation, avoided the vault's gloom and dared not linger. They spoke afterward of silent screams that echoed in their minds. Though no one had cried out aloud, the John Ware 1645 graffiti became the talk of London's academic circles. Not confined to the archaeological camp, Stanley resolved to publish a scientific report citing the graffito as evidence of the vault's insecurity. He also recommended installing mechanical locks and 24/7 surveillance around Henry VII's chapel, both to protect royal remains and to preserve archaeological heritage. As the sun set, the excavation was paused. The floor slab was sealed. Its hidden secrets lying dormant until written into the official report, Dean Stanley stood silently at the vault entrance, the last torch sputtering, his heart brimming with both exhilaration and solemn weight. For now, the eternal rest of Elizabeth I and Mary I had been transformed into a living testament to a brutal history. Power and ambition may stack one sister's corpse atop another's, but secrets and sins never slumber beneath cold, unyielding lead. But the mystery did not stop at the graffiti carved on the coffin lid. The lead coffin itself harboured a dark pressure chamber of putrefaction gases accumulated over centuries. According to Elizabeth Southwell, once a lady in waiting beside the Queen, when the lead lid was loosened, the vault erupted in a terrible blast of fetid air, a description that initially struck scientists as implausible. Yet chemical analysis of decomposition proves it entirely possible. A corpse generates methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and countless other volatile organic compounds as it decays. In an ordinary wooden coffin, these poisonous gases seep through the wood's grain and slowly diffuse into the air. But in a lead coffin, the dense metal shell traps them, allowing internal pressure to build until it reaches a catastrophic threshold, much like an antiquated pressure vessel. It was precisely this enormous build-up that Elizabeth Southwell recalled, describing the noxious fumes bursting forth like steam from a grotesque cauldron. Archaeological evidence at Windsor today further confirms that this is no legend. When Edward IV's tomb was opened, excavators found the lower limbs submerged in nearly 3 inches of a thick, black fluid, an amalgam of decomposition byproducts and rotted wood fragments. Contemporary reports describe it as corpse leachate that had pooled in the wooden coffin and was forced out by the pressure of its own decay. If Edward's coffin weighed over 500 pounds and required 8 pallbearers, then Elizabeth's coffin, with its comparable area and even thicker, more ornate lead lining, would have been an equally formidable pressure vessel. Imagine a massive metal box, weighing hundreds of pounds, sealed tight since the 17th century. Each layer of lead not only protected the body from microorganisms, but effectively turned the remains into a living pressure chamber. Methane and hydrogen sulfide combine into a toxic brew, hydrogen sulfide smelling of rotten eggs, ammonia burning the nasal passages. Whenever the lead lid was jarred during relocation or mechanical intervention, a violent burst of foul gas would explode out, turning the surrounding chamber into a hallucination of poisonous smoke. Over the centuries, Elizabeth's remains bore down upon Mary's coffin below, creating a horrifying tableau of 2 royal corpses compressed together. Picture the lower coffin made of thinner wood, supporting the entire weight of thick lead and an overlying body. The wood gradually weakened. Water and acidic byproducts pooled, and the lid became the stage for that unseen compression. Mary, once the Catholic queen who clashed with her sister, now rested silent beneath a frigid lead mass, crushed by the very body of her rival in a macabre scene no ceremony could conceal. Every sheet of lead and each Tudor inscription on the lid stands as witness to this tragic rest, power, and ambition. In life, drove the sisters into ruthless opposition. In death, they left evidence of physical pressure, a silent testimony. The subterranean space beneath the abbey, meant to preserve royal dignity, has become a pressure tomb, where toxic gases accumulate eternally, and 2 corpses have been turned into living lead blocks, awaiting the day of revelation and the unveiling of hidden secrets. Modern chemical analyses of embalming cloth fragments and gas samples from Windsor yield consistent results. The lead coffin's internal environment remains virtually unchanged, the gas pressure steady until the lid is disturbed. The process resembles a long-sealed pressure pot, suddenly venting its deadly fumes when its valve is opened unexpectedly. Researchers compare. If a 50-centimeter diameter pressure chamber can withstand around 2 bar, then Elizabeth's coffin with lead 3 times thicker must have contained even greater pressures, capable of crushing any underlying wooden structure. This story is not merely about the archaeology of an ancient tomb, but teaches us about the limits of science and our horror before decay. In the dank vault and amidst the stench of death, Elizabeth's and Mary's remains have never truly found peace. They continued to experience pressure and chemical transformation. All who witness this are chilled at the sight of time's ravages upon both body and royal dignity. The image of 2 coffins stacked like eerie bunk beds remains etched in the memories of Dean Stanley and his workers, the upper lid settling in slightly, cracks peeling back to reveal splintered lead beneath. The compressed gases formed micro-bubbles under the metal, which, when agitated, burst into tiny crackling puffs, emitting ungunner squeaks. Archaeologists who have worked at Windsor recount having to don protective masks and use ventilators to avoid inhaling methane and hydrogen sulfide. Yet the oppressive atmosphere never masked the faint but persistent odor of decay. The same scene repeated at the Abbey. Every nose cringed, and feet hastened away whenever the putrid gases burst forth. Some workmen admitted they coughed for days afterward, while Dean Stanley observed condensation on his camera lens, a sign of ammonia's humid vapors. These events sounded an alarm for heritage conservators. It was not just graffiti and cracks to worry about, but the pressure of decomposition gases that must be managed when restoring ancient vaults. They began researching methods to degas and dry crypt spaces before allowing further study and to develop pressure release valves that could prevent a fetid blast harmful to both people and nearby artifacts. Yet, to this day, no measure has proved sufficient to quell the power and ambition of the past cloaked in scientific veneer. Centurisme pus. Layers of lead may accumulate, but the haunting spectre of putrid gas and the weight upon royal remains endures. The Tudor nightmare from Richmond to Windsor, from the Abbey to the deep vault, has never faded from human memory. Beyond the grim revelations of the lead coffin and its subterranean horrors, the tale of Elizabeth and Mary is but a single episode in the far larger tragedy of England's royal mortuary practices. From the Middle Ages through the Renaissance, monarchs were not simply laid to rest in silent tombs. Their remains were moved, opened, and even stripped of flesh and bone for keepsakes. The following are some of the darkest chapters in the history of royal corpse examination and commercialization. In 1163, King Henry II, an ardent devotee of Edward the Confessor, ordered the opening of the saintly king's tomb at Westminster Abbey. Craftsmen broke through the thick stone walls, and when the wooden coffin lid was raised, Henry found Edward's ivory coronation throne seat, his bejeweled silver chain, and his ceremonial mitre intact, declaring them holy relics. He had them divided and distributed to abbeys across the realm. These treasures served not scientific inquiry but political theatre, enshrined in chronicles as the radiant beacon of the dynasty. A few centuries later, the cult of the dead took on a more macabre and practical turn. Duke Humphrey of Gloucester, Henry V's younger brother, was interred at St. Alban Abbey. Rumour spread that the embalming fluid used on his body could erase wrinkles and restore youth. Noble women paid lavish sums for a drop of this elixir, flocking to the tomb and begging monks to collect dregs of the embalming resin. When the supply ran dry, they extracted strands of his hair and clippings of his nails, even prying away patches of the waxed sarcophagus lining. In time, only a bleached skeleton remained, a grotesque souvenir rather than a hallowed relic. Humphrey's story lays bare an unvarnished truth. Royal corpses were not honoured as historical artefacts, but mercilessly exploited. Everything from embalming liquids to hair, nails, and even bone fragments became commodities for sale. The solemn rites performed above ground masked an underground economy of greed, where relico hunters trafficked in the soul pieces of a great lineage. Entire dynasties endured the same fate of repeated disturbance. In the late Middle Ages, successive English administrations frequently relocated royal remains to realign tombs according to shifting political priorities. Entire family vaults were opened to count bones, assess the condition of embalming, and sometimes conduct elaborate reinterment ceremonies. Regardless of the dynasty, the final rest of the dead was perpetually unsettled. Within that context, corpse preservation evolved into an uneasy art-blending medicine. Religion and politics. Royal physicians prepared jars of embalming fluid by royal decree and traversed ancient crypts to inject preserving compounds. But their techniques were rudimentary. Often, all that remained was a brittle skeleton and lingering odours. To calm scandalized onlookers, the court would then commission requiem masses prayers intended as spiritual balm for those who had been violated in death. By the Renaissance, as scientific inquiry blossomed, the inspection of royal remains took on a veneer of solemnity. Though its motives remained ambiguous, clerics and scholars pried open coffins to study relic evidence or divine markings, burn scars, wounds, or unusual deformities that they claimed testified to sainthood or providential favour. Many royal tombs were dissected repeatedly, their occupants reduced to unofficial anatomical specimens deployed for propaganda, proof of the monarchy's sanctity, its eerie promise of literal immortality. Yet not every post-mortem was conducted in pious reverence. England's Royal Guard once seized court records describing the sale of King Richard II's pelvic bone to French aristocrats in 1425. Those pieces of bone were credited with miraculous cures for leprosy. A popular medieval belief that royal blood and bone retained healing power, that hip bone traded for profit stood as a chilling testament to the gulf between genuine veneration and cynical exploitation. Across Europe, the tombs of famed dynasties suffered similarly ignoble fates. In Paris, Catherine de' Medici's body was displayed in a grand ceremony. Then relatives plucked locks of her hair and fragments of her shroud as keepsakes. In Rome, the remains of Pope Urban V were used for medical experiments under the guise of religious anatomy, inaugurating the Catholic Church's own brutal tradition of corpse dissection. Even in modern England, some kings and queens have seen their ancestors' bones exhumed for large-scale tomb restorations. In the 19th century, the British government commissioned the Tomb Resettlement Project to inventory royal monuments and reposition the remains of monarchs. Workers recorded countless rotted coffins, insect damage, black effluvia seeping from joints, and eerie graffiti such as John Ware 1645 in the Abbey's vaults. All these details underscore that royal mortuary practices are not merely tales of sealed caskets but a tragedy born of absolute power. In life, monarchs held the fate of subjects in their hands. In death, they could not escape exhumation. Autopsy, or commerciale exploitation. The notion of eternal rest collided with the reality of eternal unrest, where a soul could not find peace and a body could not find safety. Now, when you pass through Westminster Abbey's great doors, do not be dazzled only by the splendid reliefs overhead. Remember that underfoot lie centuries of lead layers, clandestine graffiti, and pent-up noxious gases. It is a reminder that royal history is not all glory. It is also shadowed by ambition, superstition, and the cruelty of the living toward the dead. That tragedy from Henry II's opening of Edward's tomb to Duke Humphrey's desecration, from Elizabeth I's silent repose to the 19th century, Shockwaves has painted a dark portrait of how humanity treats its power and its dead. And as the light of science continues to probe the past, the gleaming veneer of pageantry peels away, revealing historical wounds that remain unhealed. And the saga of royal tomb desecration extended well into the late 18th century, when clerics ostensibly devoted to holiness turned royal corpses into commodities. At St. Mary's Barrison, a priest named John Edwards decided to open the tomb of Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII, not out of reverence, but to harvest relics. According to contemporary accounts, when the wooden coffin lid was gently pried open, the priest discovered Mary's hair nearly 2 meters long, gleaming pale gold. He swiftly cut a precious tress and had the entire wig carefully bound and offered for sale to devotees of royal souls at exorbitant prices. Those bundles of hair, believed to carry the Queen's very spirit, became sacred talismans among the superstitious and the devout. They were hung in private chapels or immersed in glass jars and displayed like good luck charms. The practice was so shamelessly public that no one dared protest Mary Tudor's fame. In popular legend was such that all believed a fragment of Tudor radiance would bestow fortune upon its owner. Just a few decades later, in 1871, restoration experts working on King Richard II's tomb at Westminster Abbey uncovered yet another horrifying secret. The painstaking work in the ancient crypt proceeded by protocol, but when carpenters removed the lid from the dark wooden coffin, they found Richard II's body astonishingly intact. The crimson and gold damask that once wrapped the body had rotted away, revealing a bleached skeleton draped in what remained of royal vestments. But the work did not end there. The craftsman carefully gathered every fragment of relics from the tomb, crumbling splinters of coffin wood, fragments of Tudor embroidered cloth, even a scrap of a fine sheepskin glove. All these were placed into a small brass tobacco box, and, owing to the urgency of conservation work, the box was subsequently forgotten in a corner of the museum vault. It was only a century later that the damp, dust-covered box was rediscovered, a cold, uncanny treasure trove from the past, bristling with mystery. Over countless centuries, innumerable parts of royal bodies, hair, teeth, bone, even embalming fluids have become prized medical, religious, or superstitious commodities under the banner of elixir of life. Tudor embalming resin was once sought to cure leprosy, improve complexions, or carried about as a protective amulet. Strands of hair, thought to retain the soul, were woven into necklaces or tucked into prayer cloths, exchanged with promises that the Tudor legacy would endure. Anonymous scavengers, not merely grave robbers but sometimes royal officials or merchants, posing as antiquarians, brazenly pilfered and trafficked these treasures from within the hallowed walls of Westminster Abbey itself. They opened coffins to extract teeth, nails, even ribs, assembling royal collections for those wealthy enough to purchase them. That macabre story was by no means a one-off. Catherine of Valois, wife of Henry V and mother of Henry VI, had her tomb opened for public display at high admission fees. Visitors paid handsomely to glimpse a spotless ivory queen, while, beneath that facade, the real corpse had long since lost flesh and soft tissue, leaving only a painted skeleton to deceive the eye. Worse still were the unscrupulous relic hunters who roamed smaller abbeys, scavenging tatters of funeral shrouds, ivory coffin nails, or even stealthily extracting a prince's toenails to be fashioned into buttons or bracelets for the aristocracy. Operating in darkness, they exploited funeral rites and memorial services to slip among mourners and monks unseen, so that no witness could ever bring charges. The truly horrifying aspect of these tales is that they shock not merely by their historical oddity, but by the cruelty of the living toward the dead. They willfully stripped away bone, harvested embalming ointments, and dissected every element of funerary protocol for sheer material or spiritual profit. Today, when we pass through the great doors of Westminster Abbey, if we only gaze upward at the splendid reliefs, we might miss the corroded layers of lead, the smudged graffiti, and the lingering whiff of rot seeping from sealed crypts. These are stark reminders that the royal mortuary system is not merely about a sealed coffin, but a tragedy of absolute power and bottomless ambition. From Henry II's opening of Edward's tomb to distribute relics, to Duke Humphrey's ruthless extraction of every drop of embalming resin, to the salvage of Mary Tudor's hair and Richard II's funeral ephemera, English history stands amid the fragments of royal corpses. Each exhumation is not only an archaeological revelation, but a laying bare of the darkest impulses of the living. And as the light of science penetrates the past ever more sharply, the gilded veneer of courtly pageantry peels away, revealing historical wounds that have never healed. This is not a tragedy of one alone, but of a civilization once proud of its royal heritage, now forced to confront the bloody residue of power and the human remains of grief and avarice. And right above the double tomb of Elizabeth and Mary, King James I commissioned a magnificent monument of pure white marble, as if to enshrine forever the glory of the Virgin Queen. Broad, square plaques bear her name in grand lettering larger than any other. Surrounded by lush, baser reliefs of Tudor roses, the emblem of the regime alongside inscriptions lauding Elizabeth's wisdom and victories, the statue depicts her crowned, scepter in hand, her gaze cast out into the distance. Majestic and seemingly immortal within the hushed expanse of Henry VII's chapel, pilgrims passing this way cannot help but look up in awe at the statue, marveling at each exquisite carving. The marble reflects flickering candlelight, making the figure appear to glow with a transcendent radiance. At every memorial ceremony, the formal vestments of the clergy only serve to highlight Elizabeth's powerful silhouette, recalling how she healed a nation's wounds and ushered in an age of prosperity for England. Yet beneath that resplendent facade lies an entirely different reality. Beneath layers of stone and marble, in the darkness of the crypt, two lead coffins, symbols of utmost secrecy, endure time's ravages with stoic silence. Elizabeth's remain lay atop Mary's, entombed in a 17th century pressure vessel of lead that now shows signs of decay, flaking metal, bubbles of trapped gases seeping through tiny cracks. By the light of archaeologists' torches, one can plainly see the buckling folds of metal, clear evidence of irrepressible internal pressure, and fragments of burial cloth stained by centuries. This stark contrast between the brilliant memorial above and the buried reality below lays bare the propagandistic policy of the court. The gleaming marble stands for immortal power, while the actual royal corpses lie forgotten, crushed beneath the weight of lead. Every time the vault is opened for examination, it is not merely a secret tomb inspection, but a ruthless unveiling of truths. The hopelessness of death, the ambition for dominion that persists even after passing. For more than 2 centuries, no grand ceremony has altered this grim rule. Beneath the cold stone, legend cannot fill an atmosphere laden with toxic gases. Layers of rusted lead, the scrawled graffiti, John Ware 1645, tattered remnants of burial cloth, and the stench of noxious fumes oozing through every crack stand as silent witnesses to the royal tragedy. First-time visitors recoil at the sudden whiff of putrescence that slips through the floors. Each time a drill bit taps into the floor, whether for measurements or photography, a rush of fetid gas surges out, engulfing the area in a thick haze. Experts must shield their faces with thick cloths and wear respirators to protect their lungs. Many witnesses report that the creaking of the cracking lead sounds like a corpse's faint moan, sending shivers of dread through everyone present. Seen from above, the statue of Elizabeth raises its scepter aloft, as if to guard the souls beneath. But stepping back a few paces reveals that the marble likeness is merely a mask, hiding the chaotic truth of royal remains. This illustrates the propaganda principle. The outward splendor must always shine, regardless of the dark saga lurking behind the stone. Every vault opening strips away the veneer of power, not only the desire to leave an enduring legacy, but also the need to control even in death. Beneath the marble and lead, the once resplendent bones of royalty are not at peace, but crushed by the very ambition that once animated them. In the end, authority cannot conceal the stench of decay or the ravages of time. This tragedy does not belong to a single reign or a single excavation. It repeats with each opening of a royal memorial. Beneath the dignity of marble lies the abyss of history, where the dead were scorned and their remains consigned to darkness. Each carving, each sculpted cherub merely illustrates the ongoing struggle for power between the world of the living and that of the dead. Elizabeth's statue may claim immortality, but her corpse and Mary's, stacked within a lead coffin, testify otherwise. Though they lived draped in silks, in death they are ravaged by cycles of intrusion and decay. The feigned reverence shown to spectators cannot deter the hands of the living from dissecting, probing, and crushing the flesh beneath cold lead. The insecurity of power shows most clearly in this fear of being forgotten, prompting the erection of monuments without granting the dead true rest. All those graffiti, those fractures, the silent screams, the pungent plumes of decomposition, each condemns the policy of sacrificing the body to preserve a perfect image. It is the paradox of power. The more one strives to preserve authority, the more one reveals its own cruelty. Gazing deep into the crypt, one can see fetid currents whistling through rudimentary vents, drifting into the corridors of the abbey. Imagine, on higher mass days when priests pour sacramental wine and bells toll, that down on the freezing stone floor, people stoop low, pinching their nostrils to avoid the rising breath of death. Every footstep of the living seems to press upon the grave of ambition. Every whispered prayer inversely amplifies the horror below. The dialogue between the statue and the remains between pristine marble and rusted lead marks the universal tragedy of power. Even the loftiest life succumbs to time, matter, and the living's instinct to exhume. Beneath the grand memorial, the royal bones writhe under eons of weight, awaiting the day they are unveiled, so that every vestige of decay is laid bare before the unforgiving light of history. As the scientific light of the 19th century first shone upon the royal memorial and the layers of lead enveloping the royal remains, researchers realized that the corpses were far from resting quietly in their metal boxes. On the contrary, within that 10mm thick shell of lead, a fierce chemical process was underway. Decaying flesh released methane, hydrogensulfide, ammonia, and a host of other volatile organic compounds, turning the coffin into a veritable decay pressure cooker. In the final decades of the 19th century, scientists analyzed the gases captured when opening ancient tombs. They observed that in wooden coffins, the noxious gases easily escaped through gaps, and the stench gradually diffused into the surroundings. But in lead coffins, every gas molecule was trapped. The metal shell would not allow escape, causing internal pressure to build continuously. When that pressure finally exceeded the metal's tolerance, the coffin lid either popped open or leaked through tiny cracks, unleashing a blast of feta containing slightly explosive methane, the rotten new egg odor of hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia that stung the mucous membranes, leaving witnesses reeling. An archaeological report from Edward IV's crypt at Windsor provided vivid proof. When workers drilled through the floor slab, they discovered the king's lower legs, submerged in more than 3 inches of thick black fluid, a mixture of decomposition byproducts and rotted wood fragments. Scientists concluded that this was the corpse leachate, expelled gradually over time, pooling in the wooden coffin, and only overflowing into cracks when the internal pressure rose. This finding confirmed the hypothesis of compressed gas buildup within sealed coffins, demonstrating that one could no longer underestimate the putrid contents lying within. Although historian Elizabeth Southwell once dismissed the imagery of an olfactory explosion when opening the coffin lid as hyperbole, chemical evidence has proven she was not exaggerating. The lead layer, assumed to be a preservative shield, in fact creates enormous pressure, imprisoning the biological gases until everything erupts, like steam from a grotesque cauldron. Inside this hermetically sealed metal box, continuous chemical reactions occur. Ammonia vaporizes. Hydrogen sulfide gradually dissolves in condensation. Methane forms high-pressure bubbles. All lie in wait for the moment of eruption to release a wave of horror. Now, reconsidering the once common belief that lead coffins preserve bodies intact, we recognize the lurking danger for anyone who opens these ancient vaults. Direct exposure to a pressurized atmosphere of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide can irritate the respiratory tract, cause mild poisoning, or even lead to immediate fainting. The rudimentary protective gear of the 19th century was insufficient to guard against these hazards. Many workers left the vault with burning eyes and sore throats, forced to rest for days afterward. This story is not only a lesson in the chemistry of corpses, but also a warning to succeeding generations. Restoration or archaeological work must be thoroughly prepared with degassing procedures, ventilation systems, and personal protective equipment. Today's experts have developed pressure control valves, automated fume extraction, and air drying protocols for crypt spaces before opening them. Yet the memory of those horrifying fetid eruptions still haunts the field. Accounts tell of archaeologists nearly collapsing under the surge of methane gas, snuffing out their torches and forcing temporary suspension of excavations. In the early days of excavation, Stanley and his colleagues had to shield their faces with damp cloths, and the meager gas masks of the era filtered only traces of ammonia. As they documented their findings, their eyes glazed over from the stench, and their hands shook at the sight of compressed gas bubbles hissing from cracks in the lid. These were the same men who had reveled in the heroic blaze of archaeological discovery, now humbled by nature's ferocity, when the living disturbed the secrets of the dead. In the dialogue between past and present, the lead coffin becomes more than an artifact. It is a tragic reminder that no sealed container can protect humanity from confronting decay. When the beam of science penetrates these tombs, we do more than uncover the mysteries of corpses. We also recognize that the very ambition to preserve the past can turn a crypt into a pressure trap, where each fetid exhalation attests to the relentless cycle of life, death, and destruction. And the story of Elizabeth I is only a small chapter in the endless history of royal tomb openings, relocations, and even thefts in England. As early as 1163, King Henry II had Edward the Confessor's tomb at Westminster Abbey dismantled. When the wooden coffin lid was pried open, he removed the ring, venerated as a holy relic, the clerical mitre, and 3 splendid gold-trimmed robes. These items served not only in religious ceremony, but also became display artifacts, symbols of the monarchy's power and virtue. Over the centuries, the tradition of examining royal tombs persisted in ever more sophisticated forms. Crypts were continually excavated, remains inspected, and every possible part harvested. Lustrous hair, manicured nails, silvered teeth, bones, even embalming fluids. Each stray fragment, every lock of hair, was regarded as a treasure to be sold or kept as a souvenir, depending on contemporary medical or superstitious fashions. One of the most notorious examples is Duke Humphrey of Gloucester, brother of King Henry V. When he died and was interred at St. Proce, Albans Abbey, rumours spread that his embalming fluid could erase wrinkles and restore youth. Numerous noblewomen paid exorbitant sums for a few drops of this elixir of life, turning Humphrey's coffin into a shrine of superstition. Once the fluid ran out, visitors did not hesitate to pluck strands of his hair and clippings of his nails as keepsakes, until only a bleached skeleton remained before everyone's astonished eyes. At St. Mary's Barrison in 1784, records show that a priest named John Edwards opened the tomb of Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII, to harvest her hair. nearly 2 meters long and gleaming golden. He cut each precious tress and offered them for sale to collectors who believed the royal spirit trapped in the hair would bestow luck and power. The practice was so brazenly public that no one dared protest. For Mary Tudor was revered in popular legend, and everyone believed. A fragment of her glamour lived on in these relics. The story did not end there. In 1871, during restoration work on King Richard II's tomb at Westminster Abbey, the carpenters uncovered yet another horrific cache, a small brass tobacco box. Found forgotten in a museum vault, was filled with rotted splinters of coffin wood, scraps of Tudor embroidered cloth, and even a scrap of fine sheepskin glove. The box lay neglected for decades before its rediscovery. An ice-cold, ghostly hoard from the past. All this cruelty reveals a bitter truth. The notion of sanctity for royal tombs existed only in stone slabs and monuments. Beneath that glittering veneer, the corpses were treated as profit-making commodities: hair, nails, bones, and embalming fluids were seen as harvestable goods, sold to superstitious aristocrats or to itinerant healers who peddled strange cures, anonymous scavengers, grave robbers, palace officials. Even merchants posing as archaeologists brazenly infiltrated hallowed churches like Westminster Abbey. They opened coffins, rifled through teeth, pried out nails, scraped out ribs, and reassembled the fragments into royal collections for anyone wealthy enough to pay. This horror was no one-off. Catherine of Valois, wife of Henry V and mother of Henry VI, had her coffin opened for public display at a high admission fee. Visitors paid to see a flawless ivory queen, while beneath the facade the real corpse had long since lost flesh and soft tissue, leaving only a carefully painted skeleton to deceive the eye. Then came the shameless relic hunters, targeting smaller abbeys, scavenging shreds of mourning cloth, ivory coffin nails, or stealthily snipping a prince's toenails to be turned into buttons and bracelets for the upper classes. They lurked in the shadows, exploiting funeral rites and memorial services to mingle with mourners and monks unseen and unpunished. The most horrifying aspect is not just the physical brutality, but the cruelty of the living towards the dead. They would strip away brittle bone, harvest embalming resins, even mock solemn funerary rites, all to satisfy material or superstitious desires. Today, when we walk through the great doors of Westminster Abbey, if we only gaze at its soaring vaults and radiant reliefs, we miss the corroded lead layers, the smudged graffiti, and the lingering stench seeping from sealed crypts. These are reminders that royal mortuary practices are not merely about a sealed coffin, but about the tragedy of absolute power and bottomless ambition. From Henry II's opening of Edward's tomb to distribute relics, to Duke Humphrey's ruthless extraction of every last drop, to the salvage of Mary Tudor's hair and Richard II's funeral ephemera, English history stands upon countless fragments of royal remains. Each exhumation is not only an archaeological revelation, but a laying bare of the darkest impulses of the living, engraving a tragedy that belongs not to any single dynasty, but to an entire civilization. And now, as you step through the doors of Westminster Abbey, you will see, atop the double tomb of Elizabeth and Mary, a wooden statue of Elizabeth I that was refreshed 4 centuries later. In 1975, Mrs. H. Hughes, a sculptor commissioned by a descendant of King James I, replaced the statue's collar with a new gold necklace and touched up the reliefs, an effort to prolong her timeless splendor. But if you pause to look more closely, alongside the brilliant white marble monument, you will notice the worn traces of the lead casing below, pitted metal, mottled patches of lichen, and fine cracks hinting at the coffin structure beneath. The candle-lit glow still dances across the marble, but at your feet the lead shell is corroding. The graffiti, John Ware 1645, remains stark, a stubborn testament that no tomb is ever truly intact. No matter how brightly the reliefs and plaques proclaim power, The lead coffins lie silently in the dark, succumbing to corrosion, to the pressure of decay gases, to the crushing weight of the very bodies they enclose, and to the unseen assault of microorganisms. Those who once lived in glory are now nothing more than brittle bones, forgotten in darkness for centuries. When archaeological and conservation teams visit, they often hesitate at the sight of cracked lead panels and swirling mist of vapor, illuminated by flickering torches. The contrast between the brightly painted wooden effigy and the actual decomposing remains forms a silent tragedy, a rebuke of the court's propaganda. That ostentatious surface conceals a brutal reality. Every time the vault is opened, not only is a secret exhumation revealed, but also the merciless truth of death and the ambition to dominate even beyond the grave. And when the torches finally gutter out at the end of an excavation, one realizes that the fresh wreaths on the reliefs and the gleam of gold on the collar were mere illusions. Beneath them, the lead is split and flaking, the remaining lichen marking proud imprints of countless footsteps, proof that someone dared to tread here, defying sacred rites. It is a chilling reminder that no amount of glory can mask the stench of rot or the fractures of history. 400 years have passed, and the monument remains pristine, while the flesh beneath groans under the invisible pressure of decay gases and gravity. No ceremonial rite can alter the law of decomposition. Under the cold stones, a lone candle only illuminates a small fragment of tragedy. Imagine, on days of commemoration when priests pour sacramental wine and bells toll, that beneath the frozen stone floor, pockets of feta lie in wait to erupt. That is the sound of history that never sleeps, of sentinels standing guard for eternity. The story of Elizabeth I and Mary I, of lead coffins and brutal discoveries, closes with a profound lesson. Supreme power cannot defeat the law of decay. Whether Virgin Queen or Bloody Queen, in the end, no one can withstand time, biochemical processes, or the curious, greedy hands of the living. Power exists only on the surface. The flesh beneath must bow, becoming the ultimate victim of the natural cycle. In this bedtime scenario, we see the true cost of glory, not only exhumation, but the shredding of a sovereign's dignity to serve ambition and scientific curiosity. Behind solemn stone is the horror of dehumanization, of the royal refrigerator that is not a place of rest, but a crucible of tragedy for noble remains. Every fissure, every flake of lichen, every scrawled graffito stands like a curse. Do not forget, I once existed, and I still have not found peace. End of truth. And now, when you close your eyes, let the image of Elizabeth I be more than a relic to admire. Let it remind you that even those who live in splendor return to dust. Whether they are honored or violated is a choice made by the living. Bearing that in mind as you drift off, you will understand the value of respect and empathy for the past. If you're still awake, good night, and may you dream of these mysterious tales of history. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss our newest and most captivating videos.